for the new school board. Are there any nominations?
Is it normally the tradition that the vice chair becomes the chair?
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. I was thinking about the vice chair. You're absolutely right. I'm not sure technically how we do this.
Well, it's kind of unspoken, but when you accept the vice chair, you're accepting the next step in the chair. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I can move over here now. I'm passing the invisible baton to you. Thank you for taking over for the next year and guiding this group to do the work that they're charged to do and representing us before the school board at quarterly meetings.
That baton's a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
You are selling for long. Pick up where Carol left off, and that's the question of vice chair. Thinking back on the precedent that was set last time, as I understood, as I remember, Cheryl took over and we didn't have an immediate candidate, and so we deferred it to the next meeting. We all are fine with that unless there's somebody that is enthusiastic about wanting to go forward.
Rennie. I'm just going to point that out.
Jerome. Well, must be present to win.
Really?
No.
Is that another rule? It's another unwritten rule.
Let me propose this. I will contact you all probably individually and give you a call and talk it over and see if there's interest in it. Then we can take up and pass that order of business at our next meeting. Y'all okay with that? Okay, with that, we look to the committee to this is the committee update to the school.
It's a discussion, right, Dick, about that. Okay. Looking at for the charter, well, the next opportunity to have the committee brief with the school board.
Is this the quarterly
Yes.
thing we just talked about that we would be? When is that next school board meeting?
There's a work session October 15th, yeah.
It would happen at a business meeting, though.
Oh, so the business meeting at the
October 28th.
28th of
October.
October. Okay.
Which is a Monday.
Is there any other discussion on things regarding the school board? Okay. Well, I would propose, again, let me tell you how I would approach it, and I welcome any advice, but as I remember, Cheryl, when you did the last one, you prepared the presentation and then solicited comments from everybody. Or was it you just solicited them from me?
I think you were the designee for that. There's actually kind of a template memo to present to the school board. So, and Brian, you probably recall doing this as well. Tom, you as well. Basically, yes.
So this is from the charter.
Right.
So what typically has done is you go through each one of these with the committee, identify are there any concerns with staff or our process of whatever this is. If there are, then you identify what those are. If they're not, then moving forward. So it's kind of just kind of a checklist.
So go through that?
Yes.
Get input?
Yeah,
Okay.
so you get input from the team.
All right, thanks, Carl. All right, looking for input, and I'll run down through the 7 bullets here. The first one is monitoring that the bond revenues are used only for the purpose consistent with the voter-approved bond measure ballot and consistent with state law. Any issues or concerns on that? All right.
Nope.
The second one is alignment with the bond program goals approved by the school board and the board policies.
There's a copy of those attached in the packet here too, actually. It looks like this. It's about halfway through.
No particular issues there? Okay, third one is reducing long-term maintenance, construction costs, and improving efficiency and longevity, and innovative practices that achieve these, consistent with the district standards and the best practices. I guess what I would like, maybe from the staff, particularly on this one, is if you could provide any examples that we could tell the board about. Can you do that? The fourth one is communicating key information related to the bond to the district stakeholders.
It's the charter, so it's different, yeah, we're going off the charter. So what Aaron pointed out, just a little different than what Dick is reading from the charter. So, charter's on the BSD website, go under capital bond.
That must be buried in the package.
The charter is not in the package.
It's
The school board goals are.
Charter.
Again, I would like to have some examples of how we are communicating that key information. Obviously, the website, and I think we've got a great
That's a big
story
part.
to tell there.
We do a weekly BSD briefs, that's an e-newsletter, and Staff Talk is also for our internal, that we do provide regular updates on bond projects. Social media. When we go out in the community and doing presentations, we always talk about the bond. So if the superintendent's called to do a presentation in front of a community group or something like that, it'd be one of his talking points is certainly the bond, because it's it's a big and ever-present thing for us.
Let me send an email and have you just kind of tick those off
Sure.
to me.
Happy to.
All right.
Yeah.
The next one is the committee will receive and review copies of the bond program performance and financial reports, and has the option to inspect school facilities and grounds related to the bond activities when coordinated with the company district staff. I think I know that one well. I've been on tours of some of the construction projects with Aaron and Josh last time. I think we can count this one.
Yeah.
And we had one before, and I can cite
An old
those.
version of the charter.
And we've got a good story to tell there.
And sure was changed at one time.
The committee will review monthly reports produced by the district in order to assess general compliance with the purposes set forth in the capital improvement program as approved by the voters. How does this vary from what, I guess when I read the previous one, I was thinking of this being the response to that. What monthly reports are we getting besides that? Same thing?
This is the report.
That's what they're talking about.
So we can address that. The last one, the committee will perform other reasonable duties requested by the school board superintendent. I'm trying to think, have we had anything?
It's on your agenda this evening. So the board has requested bond program reserve use process. So that is one of the things that we're actively pursuing. And what would the process be to accomplish that?
Okay. All right, well, I will prepare something. And as Cheryl pointed out last time, she and I were the only ones that went through it. Would you all like to take a look at it, a draft? ahead of time since I am representing you? Okay, well, expect an email from me before the next meeting, and I would appreciate any input, comment on that.
So Dick, just to admin note, the next back is November 20th, and we're looking at October 28th for the
Right,
board.
by email.
28th for the board. So we've
28th for
got
the
a
board,
month.
right. But yeah, we'll have the back after that. So we're not meeting prior to that
So you'd have to do it by email?
by email.
Yeah.
No, that's what he's talking about. You're talking about doing it by email, right?
Yeah, you make a draft and email them?
Yeah.
I think so.
So, Dick, just to remind yourself, October 23rd by noon, that report needs to be submitted to Mary Hawkins.
Okay. I'll work back from that out.
Perfect. Okay.
If they still do it, you'll get many reminders before.
Mary's really good.
You have to have it to Mary by
Yes.
noon.
We'll do. Yeah.
And point person for me on the staff would be Josh with this thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, I understand we're under a strict timetable there, and not only for me to get the draft completed and out, but for you all to read it, give me any input. Next order of business, Student Success Act.
Okay, so I'll take the lead on that. So we have been engaging in a process. The Student Success Act is the legislature passed and the governor signed into law House Bill 3427, also known as the Student Success Act, in spring of 2019. And it's an historic and much needed investment in K-12 schools, and means as much as $2 billion statewide in investment. And it could provide the Beaver Green School District with an estimated $31 to $34 million per year, with acceleration depending on what happens.
How many years?
For
How many years?
It doesn't have a sunset at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a sunset on it. But things do change from session to session. So, but at least we know for now in the second year. So it's not in this current year. It's going to be for next year. So right now we're in a public engagement process, and we did an exercise with the board on Monday at their board meeting, and we thought we might give you an opportunity, if you'd like, to go through this protocol, and I'll take some notes so that I can say, hey, we did 2 simple questions. Well, relatively simple questions, maybe complex answers. What's going well in Beaverton schools? And then the second question is, and we can have some dialogue about that, and I'll just take some notes. And then what areas, programs, and services could we improve? So I'm going to let you marinate on that for a little bit, but let me tell you a little bit more about the Student Success Act. So the new law seeks to improve outcomes for students, navigating poverty, students of color, students with disabilities, emerging bilingual students, homelessness and foster care, and others who have experienced disparities in our system. School districts are required to apply for the funds. They're insured of the funds, but we have to demonstrate that we've done an engagement process, a community engagement process with these particular populations, but also with the greater community as well. So last night, for example, we had a community conversation. We had 25 people come, mix of staff, and actually we had quite a bit of diversity. Some African American and Hispanic folks joined us. So we need to do this needs assessment process prior to the application of funds, and this is just phase 1. Phase 2 then is we'll take that information and start to develop where we might make those investments of that $31 to $34 million. And it has to fall in some broad categories, and those are increasing instructional time, addressing student health and safety needs, increasing adults, decreasing class size, and expanding well-rounded learning opportunities. So those are really broad. So you might be thinking about your responses in light of that, because several of you have had children go through the teachers in the system, children in the system, coached in the system. So there's really quite a variety of folks, and certainly the city is a partner with us on so many things. Now, the proposals must also meet students' behavioral and mental health needs and increase academic achievement, bottom line, as well as reduce disparities among student groups. So this phase 1 in community engagement will seek input of what is working in our schools and what improvements are needed. So we care about what you think, your perspective and opinion matter. What we did last night was take, there were 6 tables, about 6 to 8 people, and they each spent about 15 minutes talking about the first question, and then there was just a really brief report out. This was captured because we had Chromebooks at every one of the tables, and people were just taking it as they were conversing and talking about, so what's working? And then we did a little bit of report out, and then we went to the second question. So in an hour, we got, a fair amount of input from them. We're putting this all into a system, and we've already had well over, as of 2 days ago, about 1,600, responses. And those are groups as well as individuals. 500 of them are kids. So students, we send it out through our Canvas online program, and they're responding. So we haven't looked at the demographics to see where they fit, but we're certainly wanting diversity in that as well. So, would you be up for doing a little bit of dialogue and just me taking some notes about, what's going well in Beaverton schools in your opinion? There's no wrong answers. I'll just take some notes and just listen, and we'll do that for about, you want to do 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
See how it goes.
Okay, I'm going to put a timer on, and then it will just, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, so, okay. All right, who'd like to get us started?
Question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. Just before, can these funds be used for any capital projects?
No.
That's a great point.
Programs?
That's a very good point. We're coming to you because you're an important constituent that's engaged in the district and important work. And again, many of you have some experience with either youngsters in the system or, and children in the system that are teachers and that type of thing, and volunteering in the system, engaging in the system like Cheryl, with our staff and that type of thing. So, but yeah, this is all for operations. And keep in mind, our budget's about $500 million, our general fund operating budget. So 31 to 34 million would be.
It's like same as option levy, almost.
Yeah, it's almost similar to the, correct.
That's good, very good.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Something that, because I've got grandchildren in school, I've got 2 daughters that teach in the schools, I do volunteer. And in particular, and I'm talking about a particular school because that's where I've got most of my hands-on exposure in these times. The kindergarten, introduction of full-time kindergarten, the lower grades expansion has been, to me, eye-opening over the last...
Pre-K?
Yeah.
Early childhood education.
3 to 5 years, there's been a huge change. Now, later on, one of your questions that you went through, this expansion to me as a volunteer in the school, there's a backside to that, and I'll wait until you get to that question to talk about it. But
you say this is a positive, though?
yeah, it's a positive.
Well, the kindergarten and pre-K expansion.
Right.
Okay.
The whole thing is very much positive. It just needs some tweaking.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a Head Start program?
We are targeting youngsters that may not have an opportunity to be able to afford going to preschool, pre-K. So they are 4-year-olds. They would be our children that will be coming to us, but they're specifically targeted.
Right.
Identified.
Right. It would mirror, very similar to what if you're familiar with Head Start, it would mirror.
Well, my wife is a real advocate for it.
Sure. Let's get her on the line then.
Well, Carl's very familiar with the school, I'm sure. Greenway has a huge population where
That's right.
they're bringing in kids that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to.
It's on the very upper end of poverty.
Yes. Yeah.
I think one thing, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the space that we're focused on is going quite well. Both the management of the construction of schools, and the spending and management of the bond funds is going well.
Yeah, the board noted that one on the meeting. Maybe it's me, just you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, compared to other districts too. You guys
Yeah.
hit the projects that you said you're going to do.
And I think, and just if I could just add, building on that, the voters, residents of our community have supported this very sizable bond to continuously improve the facilities, school district facilities. I think that's also very important, positive about Beaverton.
I'd echo both those things. I think you could kind of generalize it and think about there's a real high level of public trust in the school district, which is not constant across the metro region, which is fantastic. And the other thing I think is really great is the options that the district provides, from middle schools and SUMA, but the magnet schools, and then knowing especially that those are, have to be much more expensive to operate than your traditional high school. The fact that the district has made that a priority really creates space for students to be themselves throughout the district, and that's a really amazing thing.
Is there any room for anything earlier than 4 years old that could be done?
Not at the present time, because as it is, early learning, we don't receive funding for early learning, so we have to use our own general fund for that.
So there's a limitation.
Right, there's limitations, and I would say a key word here is room. Just
Right,
to have
space.
space for programming. Do we have an interest in going down to 3-year-olds? Absolutely. We would love that. But space is a significant factor. The other piece is we are utilizing resources that are given to us by the state intended for kindergarten through 12th grade. And we've made early childhood a priority for us as well. So, it's 8 classrooms this year?
10.
10 classrooms this year. It's not a lot. It's still an expense.
But the thinking, especially with our current superintendent, since he had a great, really student achievement from it, was opening and bringing early learning to David Douglas School District, which was a very high poverty school district.
My grandson is 2.5, or be 3 in December, and he just started school like 2 weeks ago, a half-day school. And it's, just in the 2 weeks, I can see this is huge for him. So, and he's not coming from a challenged family either, so I was thinking that might be something.
Our superintendent's really saying invest earlier, not on the back end.
Yep.
You can intervene sooner. Sure.
I'm not sure if this is in the flow and relevance, but I think the Beaverton School District is really effective and willing to work with social service nonprofits, for example, like Girls Inc. or Virginia Garcia for dental care, or food pantries, or things like this. Or I think there's a coat or clothing closet thing, and those are very relevant to the target demographics that you were talking about. So I think that's something that you should definitely mention.
This is probably not directly relevant to, I guess it goes to student wellness, but traveling with my daughter to away out-of-league games, we've experienced a lot of terrible facilities in other parts of the region. So the district, and as like a JV athlete, being able to go and have a excellent experience at Sunset, where you feel just as important as the other athletes. When you're going and playing, Grant in some terrible little city park, or Lake Oswego at the elementary school field. It doesn't say to these kids that your experience is really valued in the same way that the varsity athletes are. And I'm very glad that the district has chosen to also invest in that, even though that's another thing that probably could seem as a extra indulgence.
I went to Sunset, by the way. What's that? I'm class of 90 from Sunset. Oh. We didn't have those kind of fields when I was there.
That's because you were there.
Ouch. Ouch. Looks like a university now. Yeah, it's very nice.
Picking up off of your point about athletics and the target, or at least part of the target audience on this being poorer, could these funds be used to provide athletic equipment? And I'm thinking of tennis shoes and mitts and other things to help get them into a program.
You might want to answer this because you've served at the high school level, especially, so the principals have some discretionary funds that are available to them, and then certainly some of the boosters and PTOs, parent groups, help to backfill that and make that available so that kids can play. So we try to remove that barrier of paying to play.
Yeah, it does not speak to, the fund itself, the SSA, does not speak to any athletic programs, per se. So I don't believe that that's the intended purpose of it. I think I just had a meeting with our ADs today, as a matter of fact, and I think that it is an ongoing, it's a reality. It's to play sports, it's not just your entry fee of $200 or $250. If you're playing lacrosse, it's your stick, it's the pads, it gets to be pretty expensive. And the same thing can happen for any other sport for that matter. So there's a dividing line, but unfortunately these funds are not intended for that.
I think, one thing, and I don't know if this is still true, but I would say, judging from what I see publicly, the lack of, I think there's not much discussion about threats of strikes or labor struggles. I know those are not straightforward conversations, and it can be challenging, but I think generally the district has achieved a pretty productive state of relationships with the bargaining.
That's because of the amazing bargaining teams.
Yeah, and I think when I look at things like remember some discussions around some of the classified positions like custodians and bus drivers and things like that, and I know there must always be continued pressures to try to privatize some sectors of that work or have those people not be district employees. And I think the fact that the district continues to work that way with employees is a big sign of commitment to the community.
Tom, I think that's one that most people aren't necessarily aware of, that every employee in our district is ours. We don't contract out for a single service.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing.
The thing that pops into my mind is how well respected the Beaverton School District is, and that it's a sought-out district for people when they're choosing a place to live. And that really is a testament to the caliber of the educational system and the quality of the experience that's provided to the kids.
And even if the facilities weren't that great in the 90s, the tradition of excellence was because Sunset, debaters kept me from going to nationals, and we lost to the Sunset band every single time. But there's a long tradition of excellence.
Same band teacher. He's all in there for eons. Awesome. Continuity.
We didn't open any wounds this evening, did we, Brian?
I'm not bitter about it at all.
You've never even thought about it, have you?
Yeah, no.
He's waiting till the next question.
Well, I did marry a Sunset grad, so it's awesome. I got past some of it. But.
You married up?
Maureen, that doesn't work.
Came from Sandy, like anything would have been up. Except maybe Estacada.
I keep focusing on the youngest kids, and I know how important it is with our kids and grandchildren of reading to them at an early age. And I was wondering if there isn't something that these funds could be used for to maybe counsel parents of young children so that they are aware of how important that is, because I'm aware of a teacher here in Beaverton that was talking about some of the kids coming to, I don't know if it's first grade or kindergarten, and couldn't read at all, and didn't quite understand that, and that puts them behind right off the bat. So there could be some kind of a program to encourage that.
There is
Could help.
some kind of program, Carl, you can correct me if I'm calling it the wrong thing, but my daughter at Greenway happens to be a reading intervention specialist.
Correct.
And she does exactly what you're talking about. She interacts with every grade, and they work one-on-one, one-on-two, whatever. They try to do one-on-ones all the time, and it's constant. I know she does on her own time, goes out to the parents' homes, because again, Greenway's a school that's fed by primarily apartments, a lot of Hispanic population where it's just not in their culture. And she's taken it on as part of her job, but also in the, whatever it's been now, 20 years that she's been there, she's taken it upon herself to go out into the community and try and educate mom and dad on can they read? And if they can't, she's taken adult groups and invited them to the school to go through it, go through the steps that she does with the kids. And it's a daunting job for anyone because in some of our schools we have, what, Carl, 50, 60% of the population that...
District-wide?
Yeah.
We're a little over 40%. Yeah. But it was getting up there. It was about 48% a couple of years ago. So we've dropped a little bit since then. But poverty it's just, there's so many layers in the elements of poverty. And Dick, I think if I could take your statement just maybe a step further, and Tom, you're right, reaching out to families that we know of.
Yeah.
And there are so many families that we have yet to touch in our system. So what effect potentially is there for us to do outreach in the community via our library services, or it's, I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was kind of fantasizing and dreaming about how is it we could actually tap into every parent that had a child at St. Vincent's Hospital. That we sent them home with that book bag, for that first year of life. It's that obviously never got off the ground, but it's that kind of thing to instill that from the moment of birth. It's just reinforcing that.
I know my daughter and her partner last year, at the end of the year, went out and bought books and sent them home with the kids with detailed instructions. I mean, it was very simple. It was, didn't have a mastiff on it, didn't have anything. It was just large type, giving some instructions on read this book, work on this, a continuation of what they did at school. But the hope was, and she and her partner both said the same thing, they were hoping that the kids would take it home, get through their success story of actually reading the first book, and then give it to mom and dad, and have mom and dad read it with them, or in some cases the kids were reading to parents.
Yeah, that's
really good. Okay, let's flip to this next question then. I've just taken some notes down. Thank you for that. What areas, programs, and services could we improve upon? I've captured this, offer parent training in the importance of reading, outreach in the community for reading and other services.
The other side of what I talked about earlier, and I see it when I go to read to kids is what I do. That's one of the things I volunteer and do, is read. And with the entry of the pre-K and the younger kids, there are, unfortunately, some days where it is just utter chaos. If you have children, which their demographics are going to be that you're going to have kids that are ADD, ADHD, have some challenges. I have a grandson who went through the spectrum, and we are very familiar with it. But to go into those schools and see the kids that have whatever the and I don't think of them as disabilities. It's a challenge. It's something that they have to work on. But some of them, there's no way to correct it without having more people, almost one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And if this program could provide more, whether it's reading intervention specialists or social, I don't know what you would call it, but
you're absolutely right. It's a social emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that my grandson suffered from. He didn't know how to socialize.
Yeah.
And it's a part of the autism spectrum. He had to learn on the fly, and he's now a junior at Mountainside. So when he was going through the elementary schools, there weren't a lot of programs or aids. I mean, there wasn't anybody to go one-on-one.
In the general classroom.
In the general classroom, yeah. And it's tough because I feel sorry for so many of these teachers, and I'm not talking about my daughter here, I'm talking about some of the kindergarten teachers. If they have 2 disruptive students, they cannot teach anything to the other kids because their time is all spent with even one child. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be so frustrating to a teacher. It's got to be frustrating to the administration because I'm sure everybody hears about it and has the complaints that come up the chain of command. But it's a huge impact on all of the things that we use to measure the kids. Because if you can't take, and they have large classes, if you can't take 25 kids and give them equal time to 3 kids that are over here, those 25, their scores aren't going to go up because you just don't have the time and the resources to put in.
And this would be one of the areas, they talk about, and the broad uses is additional adults in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this fits, but there's a former teacher at Raleigh Hill School, Carol Howell, who
I know Carol well.
About 2 years ago, she found, particularly with all the political talk, the kids that were immigrants coming in here were really feeling ostracized, and she went out to all of her friends and got them to donate money or special books. She had a list of books that would fit somebody coming to this country brand new, and kind of making them feel at home or letting them know a little better what's going on here. And she put together a basket for, I think, all the kids probably in Raleigh Hill School, and presented it to them. And she said even today she'll be walking down the hall because she volunteers a lot, and one of these kids will come up and just big beaming smile. So I don't know if that would fit in, but they can certainly. I think
it fits in through the vein of access to resources. I mean, how do we push resources into the community, and even potentially. Periodically, you'll hear of elementary schools that will open up libraries in the summer. So potentially moving forward in that type of programming where it's accessible in the community.
Well, it's also culturally relevant teaching materials and our curriculum materials, and looking for ways that the students can see themselves in the materials to help them learn. and feel more comfortable and engaged.
Huge factor.
Yeah.
The thought that comes to mind for me is the number of homeless kids in the school district. Beaverton has the dubious honor of having the most homeless kids, I believe, of any district in Oregon. And I've heard different reasons for it, and I know you have resources dedicated to it, but you can't possibly have enough resources dedicated to this issue. So it seems to me to help those kids who come from low-income backgrounds and less stable families, no matter what their age, whether they're in kindergarten or 12th grade, more access, more support that could be provided within the school district. Because unfortunately, you're more than just educators, right? You're social service providers and health providers and a lot of other things along the way.
That reminds me of when we, as the bond committee at the time, Maureen would remember because she and I rode the bus together to go out and visit the various schools that were going to be replaced, modernized, whatever you want to call it. And when we went to William Walker, the principal was talking about the diversity of their student population. And I don't remember the numbers, but it was mind-boggling. But in particular, they talked about the homeless numbers. And she made a point that day that it makes sense as to why those numbers might be so high. They have a very high, at William Walker, a very high population of Nepalese. The people from Nepal that have immigrated here, and those that are living here, when they know of someone from their country coming over, they find them a place to live, and they're all kind of not sequestered, but they've found housing in the area behind Beaverton, not Town Square, but across the street, where the old theater used to be. There's a mobile home park there. There's some apartments.
Canyon Place Shopping Center?
And I was just mesmerized listening to her because she had done a lot of outreach in that school, in that area, and gone to the people from Nepal, and they had some people that were homeless, but they would bring them into that area and take them into a family's home until they could find housing. And how that relates to what the school can do, I don't know, but giving resources to certain ethnicities, if you will, where you know that there's going to be continued growth in that particular ethnic population because they do feel left out, they feel threatened, and they go to the families that they know and the society, people from the society that they know. Just as I.
There's other clusters. I mean, Somali families and clusters. Yeah, it's happening.
Right.
Right.
Makes sense. Comfortable.
But I think you're right, Ty. Does it fit, though, within the norm of what we see and how, I would say, people, for the most part, live? It's just a different approach in that how people come together, but it's also a great support system, too. You know, think about coming into the U.S. and talk about a daunting task. There are times there's American cities I don't want to go into just because it's like, oh my God, it's just so daunting. I like Portland. Aaron, country boy.
The board noted, I mean, equity is a big problem and diversity because I think administration is probably 90% white. You know, I'm not giving exact numbers, and especially teachers too, because you know I think Carl mentioned it's almost 50% brown, or you know it's half and half almost on the district, and then teaching is probably about 90% white. So that was a big inclusion of a diverse mix to match your student population.
Well, sadly, I remember, somebody said earlier, I said something about being old earlier. I remember my father talking about his great-grandparents who were Scotch-Irish, and when they came to the U.S., landed in New York, and they were virtually guided to certain places in New York. This is where you can live. And it's not just the Irish. All of us have studied history, and you had the Irish, you had the Italians, you had everybody gravitated to certain areas. Mm-hmm.
Boroughs.
So it's not something new. It's been going on since
1800.
the 20s and the 30s.
Maureen, I'd just offer, so PPS has this joint program with Peace in Schools. It's a mindfulness studies program, and I think it's offered in every high school in PPS. But it basically gives students tools to deal with social, emotional, those kind of crises that teenagers typically run into. And there's a study going on with them right now. I can't remember what university, but they're trying to correlate the success of students who take that course and how they do and grade wise. But Peace in Schools, and it's partially funded by Peace in Schools, so they pay. I think they pay half of the cost of the program. So that's cool.
I actually had somebody at the board meeting on Monday night. Shasha came over, who I coach her son. And she mentioned the same program, pretty much. Mindfulness in schools, especially with the amount of anxiety we're seeing with the kids these days, and it helps out level. That's a good one.
I'll throw just two things in briefly. One, hopefully this is a point thing, but I think the district has some repair work to do after the budget debacle from last year. I think that did not go well, and that the community needs some repair. The relationship with the community needs some repair and trust building around that. Hopefully that's a point, probably. And I guess the other thing I would, at the risk of sounding too nostalgic for the pre-measure 5 days, I'm always struck by the conversations I'm still in with, especially parents who attended Beaverton schools, remembering days when things like band options and theater programs were still available. There's still sort of I think a lot of parents still wish there were more arts options and things like that for their kids, or STEAM. That I think, and somebody mentioned the program fees or athletics fees. I think those are all things that maybe are available for parents who can afford to provide outside resources or supplements for their kids with specific programs or lessons. But there was a day when those things came with your education.
So fees are a barrier to all kids accessing athletics and activities. I did note that the BSD has some work to do to repair the trust and relationship with the community, stemming from the budget last year.
I had a couple things on the list. Bring back language to the middle schools. Got a very disappointed 8th grader in my house. Music every day in the middle schools would be awesome. And I think, especially the language, but also, it's part of building a student body that, is well-rounded and also, I think, if done right, can help build have a system that's culturally responsive. And I think, particularly at the middle school and high school levels, thinking more inclusively about how we approach counseling services to equip kids on wellness and stress management, but I think also making sure those services are culturally responsive and that if you're a kid that is a student of color, maybe coming from a poverty household, the type of stress you're dealing with is very different than, the kid in my house that's just worried about grades. And so how do we have services that can accommodate all those kids and make sure that people know that they're there? And then I think as long as we're dreaming more investment in career and technical education across the entire district, and having more options at more schools would be really fantastic.
Maureen's keeping up, I can tell you. She's typing away here.
I have about 2.5 minutes, but if you're done, that's good too. And I've just actually entered this right into the online survey, and the card that I passed around for you is if you think of something or you just want to sit down and just, after you reflect a little bit more and talk with other people, please share this. This QR code in the back pops right to this page where it explains the Student Success Act, and then it has the survey, both in English and in Spanish, right on that front page. And we are holding a series of student on these community conversations offered in English and Spanish. Last night was the first, tomorrow night will be the second, and then we have another one on the 7th, and then another one on the 21st. We welcome everybody from the community. It is open because many of you might not know that we have 75% of our community don't have kids in school, in our schools. So we only capture about 25% of our community are in our schools. So that means the rest of us, have had kids go through or whatever, and we need to care and be interested and involved in the schools too. So I've got extra cards if you'd like to take some too, and just make sure you pass those around. But you can certainly go back on. There's some demographic questions also that this asks. And I'm just going to say what group this was because it captures all of this. And we actually are working with the Northwest Regional ESD to be able to aggregate this information and then kind of break it out, especially by the populations that we're targeting, the underserved populations. Not that we don't want to hear from everybody, but the underserved populations, we want to make sure we're calling that out. This is what we heard from that population. So this informs then the phase 2, which is about where will we dedicate those resources and how do we prioritize based on what we hear. We'll be doing another set of community engagement activities related to that work, and that'll happen between November and January, February. So this could be one of these iterative kind of processes, but I think it's a good model, and it's something that we like to do in Beaverton, and it really provides us with another opportunity to really do this work. So, but yeah, ask people to hop on and give us some input.
You have the opportunity to do it multiple times, right?
We're not capturing IP addresses and that type. We do. It does ask you for it, but it's optional for you to put your email address. But we're not caring if you go on and you go, oh, I thought about this other thing. So Dick, you go home and you say, oh, I wanted to add this other thing to either one of them. You can fill out again. It's fine. Because what we're trying to do is capture themes and capture, at some point we've got to kind of narrow what we hear and what are the top themes. So what we're going to do, so the next steps will be for us to work on a summary of the findings for this needs assessment phase, the very broad opening. That'll inform this next step, and it becomes part of our continuous improvement plan that's sent to the state. This is the first step in that process to apply then for those grant funds. Okay.
That's great.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
34 million come in.
It will be for next year. It will be in next year's budget. That's right. It's between 31 and 34. They're estimating. The number jumps, and I hate to put numbers and change numbers out all the time. I just say it's about that. It's an estimate. Thank you, everybody.
Next item on the agenda is the bond program reserve use process.
So I think before we do that, we'd like to go through the monthly report.
I was wondering.
We forgot to put that on.
Yeah, that was oversight, my part. I'm going to hit highlights on page 2 and just cover a couple things because the topics that Aaron's got lined up are, I think, pretty important to go into. But the budget perspective section is where I'm looking at, and I think just highlighting that Vose elementary school project was financially closed. We had a conversation about closing out projects, but that project is closed. You can see we put money back into the reserve, $78,000, so that's reflected in the numbers up above. We have a revenue increase of $29,000 from our Energy Trust of Oregon, so that's reflected as well in the top numbers in the bond program funding total. So that money was put back into the program, which is great. For schedule perspective, and Tom, I appreciate your comment about management of schools and management of the bond program. And I've only been on board here a couple weeks now, and having Aaron and his leadership, and then John, attention to detail, very impressive, and got a great team here. But going through the projects that you see under schedule, William Walker, if you haven't met Megan Finch, phenomenal project manager. And Dick, you had the opportunity to meet her when we toured William Walker. So getting that school, this is what, her third elementary school that she's knocked out for us. So just an outstanding, job from her and the team getting that one. Five Oaks here, Jessica is our project manager, and she's just done a phenomenal job communicating with the principal, getting through the coordination and working during school as we get to wrap up that project, wrapping up phase 3 and 4, or she will be finishing up the rest of the work, and she'll be doing phase 5 and 6. Aloha Seismic was wrapped up. We returned the gym back to school on September 13th. That was the last piece of that for that current project, but Eric Bolkin did a phenomenal job there. Couldn't clear that. ACMA's underway, as known that we probably. I think you had the video teed up if you wanted to show that.
I couldn't get it to go.
Oh, you couldn't get it to go. But the ACMA video is online. You can see the demo work, and we had the groundbreaking. It was a great ceremony. And then Cedar Mill, if you haven't met Jeff Hammond, he's our project manager for Cedar Mill. HVAC work, electrical work, and we had a roof project. And we've talked about it before, but we had water damage from getting into the building. But having to deal with the remediation and getting through that, Jeff's been phenomenal, really helping out with that. And we got some minor things to wrap up with Cedar Mill, but school was back in session right when we started that day.
You made the newspaper on that one.
Yeah.
We had a lot of media interest in that.
Yeah. So those are some of the highlights that I had, and so we just again, I think from a recognition, again, Tom, thank you for.
Josh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know this is the August report, but noticed West TV is all green. So I'd be curious to hear
That's
a
all
little bit more
rain.
about that.
Yeah. Definitely.
Same question.
Okay.
So the contract completion date on that one it's in October. October 20th is what is the current schedule, or what's on contract. Of course, with the rain and the delays that we've had, and we're still tracking to strive to that time. We're going to go a little bit past that for the end of October, but there are challenges there that we're working through. Relocation.
So the cost of moving to the Timberland School, I'm assuming that's all on the contractor.
We're documenting that so that we can prepare that piece for the contractor. There's moving costs, remediation, the damage that occurred inside the building. So we're documenting all that. Pass that on.
It's kind of crazy. I think on the same day as that rainstorm, we were doing a roof project on Hatfield Hall, where the Newmark Theater is downtown. I think our cost right now we're somewhere like $250,000 for remediation because the roof wasn't closed up well enough, and
how come the news didn't cover that?
Nobody knows who we are. There are advantages to working for a government that is basically invisible.
Fly under the radar.
Making good money. I gotta get some Serpro stock out here.
Yeah.
It's like it never happened.
That's what we're talking.
Yep.
West TV.
Okay.
West TV.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. So, very good question. We're documenting all that and putting that together because we're still in process of the remediation and finishing that scope and that schedule.
Do you have the same mold issues that you had at Cedar Mill?
Same, essentially. Yeah. And we're using the same team that we use at Cedar Mill over at West TV.
One note too, like some parents, called me. That's my zone. So they were like saying, if your project's going to drift into the school year, make sure you have safety measures and containments and stuff like that. So maybe usually in Oregon you don't have to probably worry about that. just to be ready in case the storm does come over.
Right.
So those may be some lessons learned.
Definitely, yeah. Looking at not only that, but communication. Taking a point in time. School is starting and looking at where we were at with the project and communicating that to the families and the staff. That here's where we're at. Here's and moving forward what the schedule looks like. Containment, safety, location of equipment on site, the things that we're noting.
And they said outreach to their PTO and their those kind of things are always good for customer service. So. What's going on then? I got a split patch. Unfortunately, a little incident had to do. Thank you guys.
All right, that's it.
Okay. Good luck.
Okay.
That's it?
Yep. No highlights. Thanks.
So, next topic, program reserve use process. So I'm going to give a quick reminder to everybody about what we're talking about here as far as contingency. So this is our contingencies chart that we track each month, and we have the 3 different lines. So the green line at the top, that's our program reserve plus contingencies. So the delta between that and the purple line is contingency money that is within projects. So the difference between the 52 and 43, that's not money that's available for this discussion. Program reserve, that is, as far as our approved actual budgets on all projects, that is the unallocated amount for the total bond at this point, $43.8 million. And the difference between that and the red line is, you'll recall, I guess it was like about a couple of years ago now, we went through and created this line to demonstrate where we felt we were at as far as an estimate to completion for the whole bond to fulfill the voter commitment. So the difference between the purple line and the red line represents 2 main things. The first one being the repair projects, so the $98 million district-wide repairs. We're saying there's approximately $25 million of work that needs to be added to that budget in order to execute that body of work. So it has not yet been allocated, but we feel in order to fulfill the voter commitment, it should be allocated to that project. And the other big one is seismic. So there's it's quite a bit lesser amount. It's about $7 million that we're saying. We were talking about last month actually. So it's primarily all Aloha High School. So we're saying in order to complete that project appropriately at Aloha High School, $7 million more dollars. So the 7 plus the 25 roughly is what makes up that difference between the red line. So unless people feel differently, what we're talking about for this program reserve use process is the red line at the bottom. It's the 11.2 million. So it's how do we spend that?
Just to follow up on what Aaron said about the Aloha seismic, it was recommended that we bring it to the board, and he did that, and they had they're going to move it to the next October meeting for a vote. So that's the process that we're moving forward with.
So it was a discussion item on Monday night, late Monday night. Talked through that, answered questions from the board, and then did vote on it next month.
Aaron, you said you had to add to the 98 million. You increased the 98 by 25 million?
We're saying we are projecting that will be necessary in order to complete that body of work.
But I don't think we as a committee have made any recommendation to the board on that.
No. We've talked about it, we've been carrying it on this report, but we haven't made an action on it yet. And that'll be something we'll want to do within the next 6 months as the remaining balance dwindles. Because we actually will need some of that funding in order to execute projects for 2021.
I just remember the conversations 4-5 years ago that when we reduced down to the 98 million.
Yeah.
That, and it doesn't matter who said it, but the statement was made at more than one meeting, and I apologize. I know this isn't a popular discussion, but the statements were made, we'll never use that $98 million.
Yeah.
We'll never have enough projects to use it, and now we're talking about increasing it by 25 million.
Yeah, I think at the time that was the thought, and as we've gone and vetted all those projects, they've turned out to be more complicated and more expensive than was thought at that time.
When you say all those projects, you mean the core bond projects?
No, these are the repair projects. So these are the roofs,
98 million.
HVAC and doors
Yep,
and
thank you.
a whole
Yeah.
slew of things.
Bob, I would also say, to add to that, where we are today versus then is our analytics, and Aaron and his team in terms of evaluating facilities and kind of the lifespan, and certainly work that McKinstry is currently doing for us right now just to assess every asset that we have under our roofs, and our roofs included, across the district, to be able to scale that for us. We're going to have so much more information than we've ever had before for any bond, for that matter.
What I'd recommend is for the next back that we kind of go through that in detail for you, just to kind of bring everybody back. And that could be an agenda item. We could run through the 98 million, run through the history, and then talk about what the additional estimates that we're seeing that get us to the plus 25. That's on page 10. It kind of summarizes that, but I know that probably providing that as an agenda item would be helpful.
Thank you.
There's the original from 2013.
That was the 98 million from 6 years ago. Yeah.
I asked for this detail. That's when I was the chair. I asked for it for one of the meetings with the school board, and
Yeah.
I was told that I didn't need it. I wouldn't understand it.
Okay, so for the program reserve use process, we've kicked this around for a while now. You can see the date on this document was March of last year. So this is in everybody's packets. This was the procedure that we proposed to you all on how to evaluate projects. And I'll fly through it here. The school board has asked this group to develop the process, and you asked us to give you recommendations. And the way this would work, we would have people who wanted projects done at their sites, so like a site administrator, would submit an online form, probably via Google Forms or something, with what project is it that they want done. What's the candidate project? What are some details on it? We would then, as a staff, our department would look at those. We would have an evaluation committee that would look through those projects that were submitted by the building principals, and we would evaluate them. We would grade them based on criteria, which we would need to decide. There's a proposal in here for what that criteria is, and it's based on the school board bond goals. So we would go through each of the criteria relative to the candidate project and score it. And those, ultimately, we would come up with a list of projects with their respective scores, and those would then come to, the evaluation committee will convene approximately 30 days prior to each BAC meeting to review and score the applications. Facilities development will maintain the list and ranking on behalf of the BAC. We would score these. They would be presented at the Bond Accountability Committee meetings, and the Bond Accountability Committee would look at these. They would look at the staff recommendation, the available funding, and really just the overall value to the district. And then the Bond Accountability Committee would compile all of that information and make a recommendation to the school board. And then it's ultimately up to the school board whether a project is added or not. So that's this document that I just described briefly.
I would say up till now, and including your latest recommendation to the board, they take this committee's recommendations very seriously. They've never wavered from those recommendations. And so they are always asking, has the BAC weighed in? So I think that's an incredible incredibly important part of this step in here. These meetings aren't nearly long enough for you to go through the evaluation process. We don't want you to have to go through that. But you'd be able to have that data, have that information, be able to make some decisions.
So then there was the template of how you would do the scoring, and I actually listed some pretend projects on the left and some pretend scores for those projects just to see what it would look like. So you all have this in your packet. The one thing I noticed as I went through it was some of the projects, and these are not completely pretend projects, like they're things we've discussed or thought of, but some of them are really hard to correlate to the school board criteria. So I don't know. This was just a thought, and happy to refine it in any way you all feel is needed.
So like, I think the process is fine. I'd like to advocate for a different approach on the criteria. And this is based on something I did for a project at work. We kind of had very similar process trying to figure out how do we allocate funds in a potential bond measure to parks across the region, and particularly if we're going to use an equity lens in doing that, how do we do that in a kind of quantitative way that is at least somewhat objective and also transparent. And the Minneapolis Park Board, they're a regional government, covers Minneapolis and St. Paul. As part of their budget process, they actually developed a capital project prioritization model that uses equity as the primary lens. And I think it would really, it's an excellent model, and it would apply here and could be really interesting. And so they take projects and they look at them in two categories. One is, because they're mostly looking at projects in existing parks, so schools would be a clear parallel. So what's the community like where the school is? And so they're looking at racially concentrated areas of poverty is one of their primary metrics, and then also crime. But we could do some different things here. But again, is the school primarily serving or have a larger population of students of color than other schools in the district? And then the second part of the evaluation is looking at kind of characteristics of the projects. How do those projects advance equity or not? So, for instance, one of the things on their list is what's the park's ADA transition plan liability? If they have a ton of barriers that need to be remedied, they score higher for projects that remedy those barriers. And so I think, it's one thing like this, the board bond policy is great, but this is an opportunity to smirk.
Sorry, you're being very complimentary. It's okay to diss it, and if we can come up with something better, that's what we need.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I think that's a great thing, and I'm cross looking at it right now. So.
I think it'd be a really interesting opportunity to kind of push the needle on an area where the district has identified a priority and be really responsive to communities that have raised valid concerns about lack of investment in certain parts. And I think we could come up with a really interesting set of criteria that kind of meaningfully advance equity in the district with this money.
So Brian, are you suggesting that those factors be the criteria or that they be added to this list?
I would suggest they be the criteria. And that a lot of them, they would have to be, some of them would apply directly, others we'd need different criteria that are more relevant to the school district. But I think you could come up with ones that would be a little easier to score and would be more kind of transparent to the community about how those decisions are being made than these kind of really high-level criteria.
Well, Aaron, didn't you say it's a little difficult to analyze some of the projects based on these criteria?
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's like, how do you tie an electrical service upgrade to, fostering whole child development? So they need electricity in the school, right?
I think there's a lot of value in what you just said. In our world, in the public sector, equity and how we do our work in an equitable manner is a huge topic. And I don't know the details, but I've read about that Minneapolis Park District. I think one of the newsletters I get from a from a national organization. So I think it's getting a lot of airplay in terms of this very different approach to evaluation. So you know, I think it's really great. Maybe what we could do is ask Aaron and the team to go back and think about, of all these metrics, which ones really are, these criteria I should say, which ones really are most relevant given the kind of projects we're going to likely see coming through the door through this process. And we're not talking $650 million here, we're talking a much, much smaller number, so maybe it's okay to be more targeted and more specific about where the dollars go.
I think one thing that jumps out at me that is tough about the way that we've suggested this is we're asking principals for their feedback. And I think if you were to ask Josh and I how we'd spend the money, we'd come up with a totally different list from the principals.
Well, this is not a principal list by any stretch. The fire alarm? What fire alarm?
Yeah, we're looking at unfunded deferred maintenance projects that are necessary. You know, the fire alarms is a huge one. Obviously there's all sorts of ones like that. And, I don't know. Part of this scares me as far as what we would probably get overwhelmed with projects, and having to actually go through and score each of the projects would be a lot of work. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of equity projects. I'd be interested to think about what specifically does that mean.
Well, I think actually by developing a criteria that actually can truly measure value add to the district, it's going to eliminate a lot of things from being submitted.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of things people say, okay, it's not going to, it would never fly. And so I think exactly. Can you send us the link?
Yeah.
Is this the list of like 18 things that they've got here?
The criteria they use? That could be.
It's comprehensive. There's 15. I like it. I like it from the standpoint. I mean, they give you some specific examples in here. So, looking at the diversity index, you get a point for a diversity index, and so they give it some criteria of what that actually means in the area. Health indicators. So I can see where this would come in. It's SNAP participation. So we've got free and reduced lunch populations. I mean, so we've got comparators. To this.
And I'd be happy to send the version I generated for our region, because and I think and we could think about equity kind of broadly too. Adding gender-neutral restrooms, is an equity project, and maybe also advances other interests as well.
Mm-hmm. I would think that would be helpful to them.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Anytime you have a go-by, you can adapt it to the situation. What's the timetable for this?
So, as we note on here, it should be noted that the board and BSC have both recommended not utilizing the program reserve for new projects at this point in the program. And granted, this was a little over a year ago. But submission of projects is not anticipated until 2019 at the earliest. So, really, the ACMA was kind of what we were waiting for to get that.
Well, finishing our major projects, so Five Oaks and ACMA, and I think they'll have a strong interest in making sure that the $98 million of improvements. So I would see us even being, this would get pushed out to 2020 to 21, because the board's not going to, I don't care if it's $1 million left, they're going to want to make sure we've done everything else.
So it sounds to me like we've got time to reconfigure it by the next meeting, or do you need longer?
I think if we came up with something maybe January, February, I'd love to take a look at what you've got, Brian, and we can use this as a resource too, and then we can sit down. I just love this is well thought out what they've done here.
I was sure that we were going to have to create this thing ourselves, and I was amazed when I found that, because they really have put a lot of thought into it.
I think one thing that's helpful, I guess, or takes some pressure off of this process is that, as Tom pointed out, that the size of the pool is much smaller, and I think there's a pretty big difference between a conversation with the community around $45 million and $11 million. So it's, I think having a streamlined process would be very valuable. I just had one other thought on the process I wanted to share, is that I hope, it doesn't say this very explicitly in the proposed process, but I would recommend that that we begin to try to find somewhere to document that the board should reserve for itself the authority to override the recommendation of the committee. The board really should have final.
It is. It's the last one.
It says they can vote. Did it say they can override?
It says they'll determine if a candidate project will be added to the bond.
Okay.
But there's nothing binding from the BAC to the board. It's a recommendation.
So I guess I would just suggest adding that language as a reminder into this, into the process.
It's funny you say it in that fashion, because our board has really wanted you to do that.
Wanted to
make sure that things are done in a priority fashion.
Oh.
So that it's done by a separate body. I mean, that's why.
So Carl, I could see this body coming up with a recommendation prioritized according to a process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the board,
it's their responsibility. You're absolutely right. You know that hot seat better than anybody else.
Maybe building on Tom's last comment, maybe it would be helpful if this process had some sideboards on the kinds of projects and activities that would be acceptable. Mm-hmm. I'll just say, for example, what if you said it must be a maintenance or repair project, not a nice to have? We'd really like to add this to our school to focus on some of the most pressing needs. Now, I recognize that's kind of a hard thing, but it seems like ultimately you could have applications that are apples, oranges, and kumquats. And as you were saying earlier, Aaron, how do you evaluate them? They're so different in what they can do for a community. But it seems like fundamentals of maintenance and repair are so important for the safety and well-being of students and faculty. Maybe it's something to consider.
I would also go back to the list that this group recommended in terms of safety improvements that went to the board. Only down through, I believe, line 2 was funded out of 11. And for safety and security improvements across the district. There's certainly plenty of projects. Yeah.
We have talked in the past about the next bond development. Is there any overlap or influence between what we're talking about here and that effort?
There's going to end up being carryover. I mean, not carryover. A project's not completed, but it's. I would say, as we've gone through, we've learned kind of a new depth of work that needs to happen as we go forward. So, for example, seismic improvements. There's not just the seismic of the physical facility. Okay, well, we're going to do the roof. There's now going to be requirements for gutters. We've got to take a look at HVAC. There's layers to this. So, yeah, we've learned significantly from that. That's going to also help inform the next bond. So those lists are growing significantly.
Yeah. So my comment is, I'm a big fan of the thematic focus of equity for anything we're doing for this, but are we putting ourselves at some kind of risk for the bond ask if something's on this list for the reserve, and then we get to the next bond and it's not there anymore? And somebody says, well, what happened to this project? Well, it doesn't, equity was our focus then, but it's not our focus now. So that requires a little explaining to do.
I think that's a really interesting point, Jerome, and maybe it'll be useful at the next BAC meeting, if we're going to review the Minneapolis criteria, to have Eric's thoughts on that too. And maybe there's, because maybe there's some dialogue between the board and the BAC around, would that be, whether that kind of a model is useful for the board to consider too. Or whatever model works, right?
Well, it sounds to me like this should be on the agenda for the next meeting, and even if you don't get it all perfect, I think if you carry it to the next step, it would be good for discussion at that next meeting.
I think this has been on our agenda every meeting since before March of 2018, because this was put together 3-4 months after we started talking about what are we going to use the money for. So it probably goes back to December 2017, January 2018. I remember the discussions over it well. Brian, you probably do too.
Yep.
And Cheryl.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is, I think we recognize as a committee, I think you all feel it is, there's a little bit of luxury of time.
Yeah.
And we want to do this well. Because ideally what we're developing is a tool that can be used in future bonds that we're not recreating. This bond has just provided so many opportunities for us. Just when I look at our standards of how we now build a school, we have that. I mean, that is the tool that we can move forward as we go into our next project. So again, in that same frame of mind is just building our capacity and our tools for the future to do this well. So we'll come back with, it won't be a perfect product. It'll be a messy one, but that's okay.
Understood. I think that's fine. Okay, are we ready for DVD or not to be?
All right, I'll fly through this quick. Are we wanting to do a tour of the school tonight too?
Oh, yeah.
And let's be the third.
Absolutely. It's up to Brian. He was real interested.
I read this before, so I guess unless you have something to add that's not in here.
I could do it real quick.
Right.
I don't have anything to add. I can try to.
I thought this was fascinating, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So actually, Brian asked for this last time, and I already had the presentation. I had given it a few months ago. So we hear it a lot. What's better, design, bid, build, hard bid, low bid, or CMGC project? And we had an interesting opportunity here in this bond with Vos and Sato being built at the same time, same school, a little bit different site conditions, but two different contractors, two different contracting methods, and had a chance to look at the outcomes of both of those. So this just shows some history. This is for people who are not familiar with the district, and this is really what I just described. Opened the exact same time. Sato had the opportunity to start earlier, and it did start earlier, but not very much earlier. Like a couple months earlier was all. And showing some details, this is just final construction costs. So Vos, so this construction cost, this isn't total project cost, this is just the construction of the site and the facility. Vos is $29 million, Sato $33 million. So obviously Sato about $4 million more expensive. Looking through the details of that $4 million, direct construction costs were very similar, and it was pretty staggering how similar a lot of them were. It was very close. You just go down division by division, and all of them are very, very similar. Where we found the cost differences here were two big elements. So Sato, the site work was different. You can't compare site work for two different sites. They're not apples to apples. Vos had the infrastructure built out already. It was already a flat site. There was very little grading and anything like that. Sato was the opposite. It was greenfield site, tons of grading. Had to put in a whole access road to the site, all the site infrastructure. Literally having to extend clean water services out to the site, water to the site.
Does that $2 million include the never used sanitary tank?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep, that's part of the clean water services deal.
That shouldn't happen on every project.
Yeah.
So the other $2 million really seems to be associated with the contractor. So the CMGC general conditions and overhead. That one was a little trickier to figure out. On the hard bid project, VOS, so Trippett Wellman did it. They didn't break out fee the same way that Skanska did on Sato, so it's kind of hard to figure that out, but so we took some guesses on there, but it did seem like their general conditions and overhead were about $2 million more. They had much more staff on the project than VOS did. And it was reflected in the service those provided to us. I mean, Skanska was easier to work with than Trippett Wellman, for sure. And they were faster about submittals and RFIs and all that sort of thing. They did take longer too. They finished at the same time, but Skanska had started a little bit earlier. The counterpoint to that was VOS was right up to the finish line. Sato wasn't. It finished right at the end of summer, but we didn't squeak by like with VOS.
It wasn't 5 o'clock on Friday and Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So overall schedule performance pretty similar. One thing I found interesting, very interesting, because you always hear it from the CMGC people, is that, well, CMGC may cost more initially, but you don't get change orders. So that's their big thing. You don't get change orders. Well, that's just flat out not true. You get change orders. It's contingency use, and it's baked into the contract. So when we compared change orders on VOS to change orders plus contingency use on Sato, they were nearly identical. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Possible reasons for CMGC being more expensive. I mentioned this first one already. Higher overhead and GC costs. Design build contractors bid projects at higher profit margin, and because of that, they accept more risk. So we assumed that Trippett Wellman on VOS had probably a 5 to 10% fee baked into their bid on the project, and Skanska's fee was like 3%, I think, on Sato. So they're really risk avoidant. It's called CM at risk, but there's really not a whole lot of risk associated with it. And anyway, because of that, CMGC contractors, it seems like, tend to really limit their subcontractor pool to. They don't just take bids from anybody like a typical hard bid contractor does. They'll take any bid from anybody and really work to manage that sub, which doesn't always work out. It bit them, I think of Hazeldale as an example. The roof at Hazeldale, the roofing contractor went under on the project, and the contractor really probably didn't make a lot of money because they had to pony up and finish the project for them. So it's a risk. I think the coolest thing we did on all of this was using the prototype. The prototype really, the CMGC design bid build thing aside, we really saved a lot of money going with the prototype approach for all 4 schools. So we saved money on the design, about $1 million each on Hazeldale and William Walker, and then the efficiency in the construction process. We really have worked the bugs out of that prototype design. You can see the difference in change orders there for VOS and Hazeldale. The change orders on William Walker were even dramatically cheaper than Hazeldale's. And so it continues to improve, which is great. Drawbacks, limited options for site design. William Walker is a really weird site layout. And had we not put the prototype on that site, we would have come up with a different solution than we have right now. It's just the access is weird to the site. It works, but it's strange. And also, it's not really culturally responsive. We changed the colors and everything of the building, but it's not truly that responsive. So, lessons learned, conclusions. I think I'm not saying we shouldn't have done CMGC at Sato, but we could have maybe done it more effectively. We would have been better served to have had more time for pre-construction with that CMGC contractor. They weren't engaged for very long before they really had to start construction, so there wasn't a lot of constructability review. Both delivery methods are appropriate. everything else being equal, when the scope and schedule are really well defined, design, bid, build is probably cheaper. I think it would not be a good delivery method for any project where you have undefined scope or challenging schedule, complicated phasing. So 5 Oaks, this is a CMGC project, and we couldn't have done it any other way. This has been a hugely successful CMGC project. Guaranteed maximum price set early as a goal. That's a tough one. Contractors push back on that every single time, and it's really hard to get them to do it. I mean, we talked about wanting to set it at DD, but these days contractors are very resistant to that. They really point to market conditions and subcontractor availability, and it's hard to get them to do it at that point. Tighten contractual language regarding contingency use. That's something we've done here pretty good recently. Contingency use can be pretty vague, and unless you have tight contractual language, the contractors will use it just to cover their mistakes, that's not what it's for. For ACMA, we are using a pre-qualified design, bid, build, procurement. And what we did differently for ACMA versus even the elementary schools, we hired a firm to do a constructability review. So the state of Washington actually requires public agencies to do full-on constructability reviews. So Washington has a bunch of firms that are really specialized in this, and we hired someone for ACMA. And that was great. That saved us a ton of errors and change orders, I'm sure, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's like $60,000, $70,000, and we got like 400 pages of comments on them through their constructability review.
At what stage of the process do they do the constructability review? Is it when you have completed construction documents, or are they doing it earlier?
Yeah, we did it at a couple different phases, but yeah, I think we did it, the big one was like 80% CD set. That was really good. That was money very well spent. I'm absolutely going to do that on any hard bid projects we do in the future. And let's see, VOS schedule was strange. So I mentioned that earlier, but that was a really tough project. I don't know that a CMGC would have made a difference. We really were bookended on the schedule anyways, so a CMGC wouldn't have done anything other than throw more money at the problem, our money at it. Right? 1 year is not long enough to construct 90,000 square foot facilities. So as we think about planning future bonds, we're keeping that at the forefront. There's just too much risk associated with that. Questions?
I think your learnings are just really, really valuable, and Aaron, thank you for saying that you're looking at applying this to the future bond planning. Mm-hmm. And the board will find those lessons really valuable as they start working with you guys on exploring bond options.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I understand you guys have had some exchange with Portland School District on various issues. Have you talked to them about this?
You know, they were actually at this meeting. So those are the Construction Managers of Association of America. So they were at that meeting when I presented this. Oh. And they had their own presentation, which I thought was pretty cool too, talking about Lincoln High School and their mitigated value engineering exercise they went through. So we actually did that on one of our projects. But yeah, that was pretty much all the coordination. We probably need to do more of it.
So it just seems like it's a valuable thing to share with them.
Yeah.
I suspect most of Portland's problems are political rather than technical.
Well, I think what I find in this business is that no matter what the size and location, there are always common problems that you run into. Okay.
Thank you. Very interesting area. Yeah. Thank you. Good job.
One other thing that's not on the agenda, I'd like to just take 1 minute to recognize what Cheryl has done for the past year as chairman, and thank her on our behalf.
Great staff.
Anything else for the good of the order? Next meeting's November 20th.